Hello, and welcome to Unco, a podcast about what's unusual in tech. I'm your host, Timothy Buck. Last week, I spoke with the technology analyst, Ben Baharin. We spoke about Apple strategy, possible talent drain from Facebook, positive movement toward diversity in tech, and more. This week, I sat down with Bradley Chambers to discuss Apple and education. Bradley brings a unique perspective on this topic as both the director of IT at a school in Tennessee and a regular technology writer for 9to5Mac and the Suite Setup. If you enjoy episodes like these and would like to help me keep the show running, join other listeners like yourself by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/uncofm. Hey Bradley, how's it going?
It's great. How about you?
I'm doing well. You're on the East Coast, right?
I am. So a little late here.
Where on the East Coast do you live?
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Oh, okay, cool. I've been there a bunch of times. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah. So Chattanooga is a really, really unique city in that we have no state income tax in Tennessee, which from a financial perspective is great. And then we have the fastest internet in America, and so we have a local power utility that back in 2009 got some money from the government to build all this smart grid for the power network. But then they, while they're doing it, that's done over fiber, so they built basically a internet backbone on top of that, and they kind of spun it off into a separate company. And from a legal perspective, I think you have to do that. And Comcast actually tried to sue them, but for example, if they come on the power poles, they have to pay the power company the same rental fee that Comcast does, for example. But yeah, we have really fast internet. It's low cost of living. Economy is really diverse, and it's not like it's relying on one industry. So we have two Volkswagen plants, so the Volkswagen Passat and the Volkswagen SUV. They're both made here. But then we have two Amazon plants, and then just various other industries. And it's kind of become a startup culture as well with our internet backbone. Again, no caps. And so it's just really a unique city. 20 years ago, it was one of the dirtiest cities in America. And just through the government working with private businesses, they've really cleaned up the town, and it's a very green city now. So I think it's the best place in America, outside of the pollen. We have a lot of pollen.
Yeah. I've been there a bunch of times, but mostly when I was a kid, not for work or anything. So I didn't actually know any of that. I just remember visiting or driving through it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it still blows my mind. People will vacation here now, and I don't understand that, because as someone that has grown up here, that just does not seem like a town you would vacation to. But there are a lot of neat things to do, and I guess it's like me going to Nashville for the weekend, sort of thing. It's just a different city. Yeah, but it's a great city. 2 hours from Atlanta, so you can really be anywhere in the world from Atlanta. And so, and that's the funny thing about it is, I was flying. I had to go to Chicago last week for the Apple education event, and I flew direct from Chattanooga's airport to Chicago. And it's weird because in my mind, the Atlanta airport is the norm. Have you ever flown through the Atlanta airport?
Yeah, so many times.
Yeah, so
I used to live in the South, so yeah.
It's like its own city, and
yeah.
But they really have it laid out well in terms of you can't get lost. They really have done it well, but it's like its own city. And so when I go to other airports, they seem tiny to me in comparison, because Atlanta is so big. So even Chicago's airport, which is not small, feels tiny to me in comparison. It's not laid. I don't think there's as much thought in how it's laid out. And so it's just funny to me that the Atlanta is the norm, but I know for most people that's the exception.
Yeah, I think what makes Atlanta hard as a layover is it is so massive, and if you get one of those where you fly in on one side and you have to leave on the other, it's really, really hard to make your flights.
Oh no, yeah, it is, and I really don't do the Chattanooga flights a lot unless I can do direct. So I'll do Chattanooga to Charlotte or Chattanooga to Chicago, but I don't really like to do Chattanooga to Atlanta to somewhere else, like Atlanta as a layover. It's not bad going, but on the way back, I can drive to Atlanta in 2 hours, and so I don't want to have like an hour and a half layover just so I can then like have a 30-minute flight. Like I'll just get in my car and drive home at that point.
Right.
If I can do like a 20-minute layover, yeah, I'll do that. But otherwise, like I'll drive home.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So part of the reason why I asked you on the show was because of, you were at the Apple event, and I believe you write for 9to5Mac as well. But what is your like full-time job, and why are you interested in this education market and the Apple event in general?
So I write freelance for a couple websites, 9to5Mac being one of them, and then there's also the Sweet Setup and Toys and Toys, which are owned by Blanc Media, and I'm sure you know Sean Blanc, one of the best guys, honestly, you'll ever meet. He is just one of the nicest guys on the internet. So if you don't know Sean, he's a great person to follow. If you know the focus course and some of those other things, he's behind that, and it's just really a neat guy to get to know. And so if you don't know Sean, it's at Sean Blanc on Twitter.
I think I followed him for a while now.
Yeah, he's just a super guy. So I write. So I've written there for a number of years, and then I'm relatively new to 9to5Mac, and I used to host a podcast with Fraser Spears called Out of School. That's at outofschool.net that we just ended probably a month ago. And then so post that, I started writing for 9to5Mac, kind of doing a weekly education column. And in my full-time job, I'm the director of IT at a independent school here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so I've been there since 2009. And so we're an all Apple school, so I manage, a couple hundred iPads, a couple hundred Macs, and so I really like, when I see this stuff at scale, and that's kind of the perspective I bring. I think a lot of this through my column is when like when you're watching, say, the WWDC keynote about like iOS 12 this fall or this summer, like you'll be watching it and seeing things differently than I do, because I always like think of things like, how does this work like amongst a dozen like teachers that like may or may not care about like whatever version of iOS is, and so I deal with people all day long who see technology in the same way I see a drill. Like when I need a drill, it's a tool for me, and so that I think that brings a unique perspective, because you tend to be less excited about flashy things and then way more excited about very practical things. Good example of a practical thing. I don't know, do you use G Suite at all in anything you work on, like Google's enterprise email tool, or do you use that?
Yeah, we did at work for a while, and then just maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, we switched over to Microsoft 365. So yeah, I do have experience with it.
So a good example of something very practical that they launched was Team Drives. And what Teams Drives are a function of Google Drive, where you create a folder and then like you invite people to that folder, and they have just as much access as anybody else. So any document in there really has no owner. The whole premise of a Google Doc is there's an owner that in this, someone shares it with somebody else. So things in the Team Drives, like they don't have owners. So whether you delete accounts, people leave, people get hired, anybody that is added to that folder has access to every document in there. And that's like a very practical thing that we rolled out, that Google added, that we rolled out, and people love it. And so like I'm way more interested in tools like that than I am some of these like more like pencil support and an iPad that is still pretty expensive, the pencil that is. So yeah, so Apple sent me an invitation to the event through 9to5Mac, and so I was covering that for them, and it was a unique event because there was no live stream, and so that meant that people that wanted to know immediately what was happening, they were following along with live blogs. And I don't know if you've ever ran a live blog for an event, but that is stressful, because you're trying to you're trying to and we're just updating in the back end of 9to5 CMS so there's not like a live blogging system. So you're basically like typing in snippets and publishing, like you're updating an article essentially. And so you have to logistically decide when to hit publish or when to hit update, because they keep on talking on stage. And so you're trying to decide like when's a good time to stop writing and hit publish so people can follow along. And that's where like using Twitter in some ways is easier, because you can just like keep rapid fire publishing. But yeah, the event was really, really well done. You get there. I've never been to Chicago before, but was windy and it was cold, and it was just like a constant drizzle for the 26 hours I was there. But we get it to this school, which honestly looks like Hogwarts from Harry Potter. Like it is the most one of the most beautiful campuses I've ever seen. It really was spectacular. It's particularly from the outside. It looked like it was just no words can describe how beautiful Lane Tech school is. And I mean, even when we're waiting in line and it's a little cold and a little drizzly, Apple employees are walking around with incredibly large smiles on their faces, handing out umbrellas for you to use in line. I mean, they're just fantastically nice. And I don't know. I mean, I care about things like that. Like when people seem like genuinely happy to be somewhere. I appreciate that. Like they're not grouchy about being outside at 8:30 in the morning in the rain. Like they all seem just to be in the best mood. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like when people are infectiously in a good mood like that. I'm really big on that when we hire people. Like obviously we hire for skill and things like that, but like I am really interested in people whose personalities are infectious, because I feel like if you get like people that are infectious the wrong way, like they're kind of the like Eeyore of the group, that it's like a drain on everybody else. And if you get somebody that just is genuinely positive and like genuinely is a happy person, I feel like that is infectious to the rest of your staff. And everybody at Apple seemed that way. So we go through the line and we get I showed them my passport QR code that I had loaded into my phone from the invitation, and they scanned me in, gave me a press badge. That was the thing is like every badge was colored, and like the yellow badges with the Apple logo meant like you were press. And so, although there were a ton of educators there, I was there officially as press. And so, they get you in, then they go to this media lounge, and I get to really meet and talk to a lot of people that I follow their work, Jason Snell, Renee Ritchie, Sunnery Caldwell, Stephen Aquino. Is that how you pronounce his last name? He's the iOS accessibility expert. I think it's you pronounce his last name Aquino. It's hard to tell with Twitter sometimes because you don't know how their names are always pronounced. But just a lot of people I really admire, and I loved it because they had a HomePod in there that was on a white table, and I thought that I got a chuckle out of that, thinking about the rings and. But then a lot of good food, and then they kind of got us into the event, and we were just sitting there waiting. Have you seen pictures of the actual event? And I didn't know if you'd watched the video or not.
Yeah, I did. Can you hear me? I was talking before, and I think I got muted.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay, cool. But yeah, I did. I saw pictures. It looked really beautiful.
Yeah, it's from what I understand, is Apple upgraded some lighting and some audio of the auditorium, and I imagine they were there for weeks in advance. And I can't imagine that they took all that away. So there's a part of me that like wants to think they left all that for the school, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I hope so.
And so we get the event kicked off, and they really spent a lot of time talking about the cool ways that teachers are using technology, and those are really fun stories. But I'm trying to think of the best example. So do you ever watch the infomercials where like they're selling exercise stuff? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like they're selling exercise gear, and they're like showing like the people that like are just like shredded. Like maybe they started out like real average, and now they're just like shredded. And you feel like those people, like, that's like, that is not me. Or, like, it's not, like, indicative of how anybody that buys this is going to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, that's clearly the exception.
Yeah, it's like, that's a good thing, but the real market for this is not that person, or at least my part of the market for this is not what that person is.
Everybody that buys that is not going to look like that. And like there's various reasons why on the exercise things. But I feel like in some ways when they show those like incredible teachers, I struggle with that because it's like that's not that those teachers are the exceptions. Those are the ones that like love technology and like love it for technology's sake. When a lot of teachers out there, like, they see technology as a tool, because the thing about teaching is like it's a really, really hard job. You've got to take 15 to 30 kids, depending on how your school's set up, and deal with like discipline issues, like deal with all sorts of like interpersonal issues. You've got to prepare lessons, you got to teach the lessons, and they've got to figure it out. And then they have to take standardized tests and like hope they actually retained it. And so I feel like a lot of times like we have like these expectations that teachers can just like continually take on more. Oh, these are like apps you need to learn. Like this is new theories, and it's like, when do we like take things away from teachers' plates? Like when do we look at curriculum and so let's say like, oh, we want all of our teachers to teach coding. Like that's cool. Like I think coding is awesome. Not even just because I don't think everybody's going to code, but because I think it's like teaches great problem solving skills. That's why I think coding should be taught number one in schools, is because it teaches that skill. But like, what are we taking, if we expect teachers to all of a sudden teach coding, what are we taking off of their plates? Do you see what I'm saying there? Like when do we take something away from them?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Actually, both of my parents are teachers, so I fully understand they have a hard job, and there's a lot on their plates, and I get what you're saying. If we just, especially for people who don't just if they're not the outliers who love technology and are going to learn it just because it's fun for them, then we're adding like additional like requirements to what it takes to be a good teacher if you have to learn all of this tech as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you work for like a business and all of a sudden like you have a new product, like you're maybe over one product, but then you're like, oh, we're launching this new project and I'm going to be the project manager over said product. Well, you probably get things taken off of your plate to account for the fact that like you have new responsibilities. And I kind of feel like it's that way with teachers, and I feel like that's where like we as an industry maybe have done them not even the tech industry, but it's just how it's worked out. And we've just continually expected teachers to do more. I mean, like you see like these blog posts on like the educational circles. It's like top 30 apps you should be using in your classroom. And it's like, really? Like 30 apps? Like you expect a teacher to pick up 30 apps and use it in their classroom? Like, how about here's one app you should be using in your classroom, and here's how you can use it every day. That's kind of my like practical stance on a lot of that. It's like, so when I'm watching this keynote and they're telling these honestly are great stories, like I'm more thinking like, okay, like let's talk about like I almost want to see like a video with a teacher who actually like doesn't care that much for technology, but then has cool things that they've done with the iPad, like kind of kicking and screaming along the way. Does that make sense? Like show me someone that doesn't love this naturally, and like let's see the cool things they've done.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think this kind of ties into in the last episode of Unco, I actually had Ben Baharin on, and he talked a little bit about the Apple event for like part of the episode, and his differentiation. It'd be interesting to see what you think about this, but he described it as Apple is targeting education and not the education market. And he's saying that as he used the example of like the iPhone in enterprise, and how like the iPhone for the longest time they didn't even provide all of the like features that Android and Windows Phone and stuff had for making the iPhone easy to use for an enterprise, but they were still used because they just made it for that type of person in a company who is going to want to pick a phone because that's what they're going to use it, and they're going to make IT get used, like make it happen. And he's saying like the same concept for like they use that as a Trojan horse to get into the enterprise market, where they eventually built out all the other stuff that they're not as good at, the services and the all of those other pieces, but that they got in the market by like this roundabout way of going directly to the consumer. And he's saying that at least in his his wife is a teacher as well, and apparently in their school, anybody can use whatever. Like they have stuff that is provided to them, but if you want to use an iPad, you can bring an iPad and teach with an iPad and have your students use iPads. And he's saying like that is what he thinks their strategy is. Does that like line up for you, or does it?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, because you think about the technological climate when the iPhone launched. We all like hated our phones. They were all terrible. I mean, I had a Trio 700W. It was one of the, the Trio was a great phone at the time, but like it was just a mobile phone with a basic kind of computer functionality like added on, and where the first iPhone was like a pocket computer. So it was just like a drastically different environment. And the I think the iPad kind of piggybacked along with that. Like we all were like loving the simplicity of the iPhone, and that the iPad brought that to kind of like a bigger form factor. But I think the problem is like none of us really hated our computers the way we hated our mobile phones at the time. Like like even when the iPad came out, like I had a MacBook Pro, one of like the ones with like the slot loading DVD drive, and obviously like by today's standards that's a terrible computer, but like at the time, like that's a pretty good computer. I'm pretty satisfied with that. And so I think it's just like a different thing. Like imagine the iPad in a world where the only alternative was like a Windows PC. That it's a drastically different like strategy for Apple at that point. And so I think the problem is like they're selling the iPad in much the same way, or to schools in much the same way they sold the iPhone to the enterprise, like hoping that like the C-level people like force it into the organizations. But the problem is, there's like obviously always discussion about like is it better? Like, is it really best that IT kind of is the gatekeeper and decides things? And I could see why someone would say no, okay? But on the flip side, like when something doesn't work, like who do you expect to fix it? IT. And so the things IT people are really concerned about are number one, like manageability, number two, security, and number three, usability, in that order. And that's my opinion, I guess. And so like, and you may think like, gosh, you should be number one, should be concerned about usability. And like, obviously I'm concerned that like users enjoy their machines, but like, it doesn't matter if they enjoy them if they're not secure and I can't manage them in mass. And so like when I look at things like Chromebooks, like that hits a lot of check marks for the IT people. And then from an end user perspective, like that's a much better experience than a crappy like Windows PC that costs $300. It's like really underpowered. And then depending on what you're doing, like it checks all the boxes that a MacBook Air would do. I mean, I think a lot of people get by Macs that are essentially using them as Chromebooks. Like they're just buying a Mac and using, Safari or Google Chrome to access 95% of their things. Obviously, like I don't, but I think a lot of people do. And so like the iPad, I think, has a very specific story and a very specific things it's good at, and Apple is selling that story to education. But the problem is, as Chromebooks have gotten better and better, and like Google's management system, those like really does work well, and it's very tightly integrated. It has a distinctly different story to tell than the iPad, and it benefits. Like it's really from a system administrator perspective, it's kind of a dream device in a lot of ways, and just kind of how you can manage it and how you interact with it and how you can deploy it. And then for a lot of like end users, it checks all the boxes. Does it give you like the same interactivity of apps that the iPad does? No. But the thing is, like, I don't know if you saw the news of the Chrome OS tablet that's coming out from, I believe, Acer in April. Have you seen the news on that?
I have not. No.
So it's a tablet format, and it's running Chrome OS in the tablet format, and then. But the thing about it is like Chrome OS has added the ability to run a lot of Android apps through the Google Play Store, and so it's like, okay, like that's getting a little interesting. So you're getting a full web browser, you're getting the full version of Chrome, full version of the Google ecosystem, Google Drive, Google Docs, et cetera, et cetera. Then you're also getting like all the, you're getting Android apps. It's like, okay, I could make the argument that at this point, Google is encroaching more on Apple's strengths in education than Apple is encroaching on Google's strengths in education. You see the angle I'm hitting there?
Yeah.
The tablet form factor makes a lot of sense in a lot of situations in education. But it's not 100%. And if you gave someone, like if you said, hey, like here's an Android or Chrome OS tablet with like, I don't know if this thing has like external mouse support, but like let's say that it did. You give me a Chrome OS tablet with a Bluetooth keyboard, external mouse support, so I can get, when I want it to be kind of in a quote unquote like laptop form factor, I can get that precise input. But then if you want to, just like take this thing outside. It's got Android apps. You can use the built-in camera to take pictures of things out in the open. Like we have all these, there's a lot of great educational apps on the Google Play Store as well on Android. That's becoming more and more a kind of one device to rule them all, more so than the iPad in some ways, because again, the iPad doesn't have a full web browser. It's still a mobile web browser in a sense. The Google ecosystem is really, really poor on iPad compared to how it is on the full desktop. And I don't know, like I feel like Google is taking big swings in education, and so they can either they'll win big or they'll swing and miss really big. And I feel like Apple is taking very small swings, and so even if they hit, they're going to be very small hits. And so one of the things in my article on 9 to 5 Mac that I kind of looked at, kind of an event retrospective, was looking at the 2012 event that Apple did in education, where they kind of talked about their textbook strategy, and they swung very small with that strategy. And they've missed very small. Like, does that make sense? You see what I'm saying? Like, even if they that had worked, did that matter? No. One of Google's big bets is like making its G Suite free for schools with unlimited storage. It's a very big swing, and they hit very big on it. And it was a very big win for them. And Apple is not taking these very big swings in the education market. Maybe you could argue the iPad being $329 or $299 for schools is a big swing, and that's a good price. I'm not, I don't think that's a bad price at all, and that's not the reason. In some ways, I'm dissatisfied with Apple currently in the K-12 market. Is not the price of the iPad. It's really the services on top of it, so that's kind of where we're at. Kind of going back to the event, the Crayon is, I think, a really neat device. I don't see that going well for a lot of schools. The reason being is when you're thinking about schools, you have to be thinking about like multipliers of 1,000 or 5,000, depending on like how big your district is. It's like, are you really putting in a purchase order for 5,000 of those pencils or 10,000 of those pencils at $49? I'm like, do you see? I mean, like, how do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, maybe in some of the schools where Apple has like really good relationship with them, but across the whole U.S., I don't really see that happening.
I mean, like a 5,000 person school district is not that big. I mean, there's plenty of them that have way more, have more than that. So if you do 49 times 5,000, that's $245,000. I mean, that's a lot of money for a pencil. I mean, like essentially a stylus. And so when you start thinking of that, it's like, wow, that is a lot of money. Like, and number one, like, how do you, like those, how do you manage that? Like, how do you control where those things go? Like, how do you even get all those back? Like, there's, like, if I was at a district with like 5,000 students and I deployed all of them Apple, the Crayon pencil from Logitech, like, I expect to get maybe half of those back at the end of the year. Like, those things are going to go missing so quickly. And then how do you deal with that? Like, as a, like that's kind of comes across, falls back on IT to come up with solutions. And there is no solution how you control those things. Like, what do you do? Attach them to the iPad with some sort of like, adhesive, with a string like they have at the bank? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because this was an education event, but I think somebody on Twitter was talking about that, like, maybe the best thing that came out of it was that the low-end consumer iPad got a really big update. Like, I got a pretty good update. Like $329 is a good price if you're just a person buying one for your, yourself, and the fact that it works with the Apple Pencil now and is significantly faster, that may have been the biggest improvement for Apple customers, and not necessarily the education stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing you got to remember about the iPad, when the iPad came out, you remember how the big thing was, it was like some people were expecting it to be $1,000 and announced it was $500. Well, so we were comparing it to a $1,000 MacBook and then like a $400 cheapo Dell PC. Or Dell laptop that was really underpowered, running like Windows XP or Windows Vista or whatever it was running at the time. So that was like the market it launched in, and so that price was like amazing. Well, since then, like Chrome OS has come along, and again, I'm not necessarily like a huge fan of like Chromebooks. Like our school is still iPad, but you have to I run through these scenarios in my head in terms of like, is that still the best machine for us? Like, does that make the most sense financially and with our students? And like, so far it still does. But like, as Chromebooks mature, they are less expensive. I mean, like a good Chromebook is $250. A cheap Chromebook is $150, but a good one is $250. Like, is that still the best machine for us? Is the iPad still the best machine? Because again, it's not like the low cost machine. It's in some ways the expensive machine.
Right.
And to me, Apple's biggest weakness going forward has really nothing to do with the iPad or even the Chromebook. It has to do with its services that it offers schools, like iCloud essentially. And so their big battle over the next 5 years for schools is iCloud versus G Suite. It's not just about the devices, because things are going to a cloud first model, and these devices are becoming cloud interfaces. You see what I'm saying there? Like, it's not just about the device anymore.
Yep. Yeah. No, and I think that's true even outside of the education market. That like many of their biggest deficiencies right now are in the services space, and those aren't really what have been Apple's core competency historically. Like Apple's been really good at making on-device software, and that's been like a massive differentiator for them is that they built this community of people who build really good apps for the Mac originally, or now iOS, and that is still, even though Android is catching up in a lot of ways, the iOS App Store is still a really big, differentiator in that it's typically, if somebody's going to make an app, they're going to make it for iOS first, and then they may port it over to Android. So they're coming from like that history and that, that strength, and they're competing against people who have the exact opposite strength with, Google and Amazon, who have the strength of building, centralized systems that provide services to people all over the world and can be rapidly iterated on and improved every single day. It's just a completely different model and a completely different way of looking at software and a completely different way of managing releases, and it will be interesting to see how that affects Apple in the education market moving forward, but also just in the market in general.
So like it's funny. I was talking. I was going on Twitter storm. I guess it was last night. And I've got a major bug in iOS 11.3 that's like really impacting us big time. And I'll circle back around to that. But like, it's like when I talk about Apple services in education, I know like a lot of people, when they think about Apple services being not as good, they think like, oh, Spotify gives me like their Discover Weekly playlist is better than Apple's new music mix. Like that's, and I would argue that's true, and those things could get better. But like our problems are, Apple is just not involved in businesses that Google is with us. So, and I think this is like the thing I think sort of has surprised a lot of people when they've learned. Like this has been very topical lately. So like G Suite is like our email system. I know you know that. But I'm just kind of saying that for like everybody else. Like, so we point our domain, like our website, MX records, our mail records at Google. They handle our email like it's at your domain name. They have our calendars and contacts and like all of our Google Drive stuff, like it's all built in. It's like a corporate system for us. Like the identity directory is in G Suite. Well, Apple just doesn't offer that. And so like they have these things called managed Apple IDs that you can like build, but they are just like essentially like, app purchasing tools. Like you can, again, sync some like, calendars and contacts, and you can use iCloud Drive with that. But like you can't do email. Like I can't do my corporate email with that. So it's really just another system to manage. And there's no, like, it's a manual process to create them unless you use one of 4 student information systems, which Apple can sync with. And then there was a leaked page for like 30 minutes that on Apple's Australian IT section. Okay, that sound crazy. On Apple's, they have like an IT page on most of their country's websites, and on the Australian version, it mentioned coming next winter, syncing with G Suite and Microsoft Active Directory, their hosted version of that. For like basically, like I make a G Suite account. That person automatically has a managed Apple ID created, and it's obviously like a sync password. From my understanding, it's going to be like single sign-on essentially. And it's since been removed, and so you assume that's coming, and they just announced it prematurely, and it's a random time to launch it in next winter, because that means it's like not effective until school year 2019-2020. But like I find that funny that Apple is essentially punting identity management to Google and Microsoft, when during the event they kind of talked about their commitment to student privacy. And it's like, and now again, we have very strict contracts with Google for how they manage, like, like our students' emails not mined for advertising. I mean, if you Google, like, if you search on the internet, that's a weird term. If you search on the internet, like Google K-12 security, like they have a robust explanation of how they work with that. But I find it funny that they would kind of tout their privacy stance, but then essentially punt identity management to a company who they often talk negatively about from their, what they do. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
And so I just find it, and so that makes really, my point in my article was Apple says they're all in on education, but like I can't be all in on Apple. Like let's say I was really, really sold on Apple hardware and Apple services. Like they basically don't allow me to go all in on them. They're basically saying, hey, you can go all in on some stuff, but then you're still going to have to go Google or Microsoft for this. But Google and Microsoft, like you can be an end-to-end services and hardware stack with Google or Microsoft, and you can't with Apple. And I really find that interesting that they have not gotten into that business of managing schools' email for them.
It seems like either they have a bigger play that they're waiting on, or this is not as high of a priority as they make it sound during the announcement. Did you hear? I don't know how this connects directly, but there were some rumors about Apple moving off of x86 and to ARM processors on the Mac, and I want to tie that to this in that like that makes sense if they're really doing that, because a lot of the slowness we've seen around the Mac and the Mac software updates and all the other things that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, if they were diverting resources to build this new thing that's going to be a massive change that comes out 2 years from now or whatever, then it kind of makes those slow times make more sense to us. But do you think that it's possible they're doing something like that for the education market where they really do care about it, or is it one of those things where it's just not a high priority at all?
Well, I think they care about it, and I think Google cares about it, and I think all the companies really care essentially because they make money off of it. I hate to be like as kind of melancholy as that, but like these companies are for-profit companies, and so I think they both see these markets as a way to impact students, but they also definitely want to make money on them. And I think Apple's blind spot here is like every time a school signs up for G Suite, that's somebody that can easily deploy Chromebooks. And I mean, we've been running G Suite since 2010. I mean, it's 2018. So like, I mean, that's, they've gone 8 years and let our school get really entrenched in Google. And I don't think they have the luxury to just like sit around it and wait on this. I don't know. I mean, I think if they as a company cannot do these projects like at the same time, like if they can't say, oh, we want to build an email ecosystem for businesses and schools, if you can't do that as well, I mean, it's like, I understand like there's only so much a company can do, but it's like at some point you have to build a walk and chew gum at the same time. And if you take multiple years to do this big transition, are you building it for people that don't care about your devices anymore because they've moved on to other services? And the thing is, like, so going back to our this week, last week, so iOS 11.3 dropped. Okay, so I did not install it last week, and then our MDM provider, so MDM stands for Mobile Device Management, and that's how you manage iPads is through an MDM provider, where Google offers built-in, they have a built-in management tool, like with Google. You don't have to buy a third party, and with Apple they don't. They have a really basic version on their macOS server, but like nobody that really, I would say, knows what they're doing is going to be using that. They're using a company like Jamf or AirWatch or Mass 360. So that's how we manage those. And it's not this, you have to hook everything up right, and it can be a little bit complicated. But they had 0-day support for iOS 11.3. It'd been out for, like roughly a week. I pushed iOS 11.3 to much of our iPads. Well, kind of didn't think anything about it. It just, it's pretty easy to update iOS through an MDM. You just hit a couple buttons and then, it downloads it on the iPads and reboots, and they do what's called checking back in, to where they kind of report like, hey, I'm awake now and here's my information. Well, I noticed that like I still had an enormous number of devices not on 11.3. It's like, okay, well that's weird. And sometimes like the devices don't take the update. Maybe they were like low on battery, or maybe they were asleep for too long. Dropped off Wi-Fi. But these devices, like, then I went to push a testing profile to some of our iPads because we had students starting standardized testing today. And so we put these in like a testing mode where they are locked to the testing application. So I specify which app they're locked to. And so these iPads like literally won't do anything but launch this app. If you even do a hard reboot of the iPad, it relaunches this app when it comes back on. Well, it was only taking them on like about half of the iPads. Well, doing some more research, all the ones that wasn't taking them on were on 11.3. So get a hold of my MDM company, and they said that literally 10 minutes ago they had found that this was a bug. And iPads that were updated by the management system versus like someone on the device hitting update, some sort of like weird quirk, and they're not talking well. And they stopped where I literally can't put these iPads in testing mode. I can't push new apps to them if I wanted to. And the only solution was to wipe and to re-enroll. And it's not as simple as like wiping and kind of restoring from iCloud. Like there's a little bit more involved in kind of getting these things back into your management system and getting them kind of reconfigured. It's not something you want to be doing on a pinch. It's not hard, but it takes a little bit. And so that was kind of my big frustration last night. It's like, this is like a show-stopping bug. Like this, I had to stay very late at work last night, kind of putting, because I can put these things in testing mode manually, but I have to like touch every device that we gonna use, and that is like not what I signed up for. And
right.
that, that like when I have like iPads and a management system that I pay a decent amount of money for, like that's just not. And then I like struggle with like, I guess theoretically like I should have tested one iPad on 11.3 before I pushed it to all of them. But there's a part of me that says, like, Apple released it. My management system supported it. It's not my problem. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm not a beta tester. Like, I'm not paid to be an iOS beta tester. I'm not an app developer, so I'm not beta testing these releases for my own apps. Like, yeah, I was running things on my phone. Everything seemed fine. It's not that there's anything specifically wrong with iOS. It's like its hooks and how it talks to the management system has slightly changed. And, like, these are the things that I get frustrated with. It's like, when people say, oh gosh, like, oh, iOS has this weird quirky bug, haha, look at this screenshot. Like, when I have bugs, I'm like, people can't do their jobs, and like people like are super like frustrated with me, and like, that's the thing. It's like when when people complain about, little quirks, like I have things that like cause me to stay late at work and cause impacts to students. That's why I rail on a lot of things, not because like I'm tired of like my stuff at home not working perfectly. Like these are things at my job I have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting perspective. I think it's what makes like reading the stuff that you've been writing recently. I guess I first started reading what you've written on 9 to 5 Mac. I hadn't really followed your writing before then. It's just definitely an interesting perspective that you don't really see much in the like Apple tech world. You see a lot of people talking about like they're just end users or they're power users or they're writers who spend their whole time thinking about Apple products, but you're actually like implementing this in a school environment and seeing some of the downsides that some of the issues that Apple has for those type of users, and that's a really helpful perspective to have.
Yeah, and like even when you think about things like the dongles on the MacBook Pros, like if you manage 200 laptops and you're rolling out MacBook Pros, and every one of them needs a $70 dongle, well, that's like almost $14,000 in dongles. That's a lot of money. Or things like the MacBook Pro keyboard reliability, like that's super annoying if it's like your home computer. But like if I've got like business, if I got people that like they use these computers to do their jobs, it's hard for me to be like, oh, I got to send this off to the depot for a week because you got a potato chip crumb in it. Like that's really annoying if it's your personal computer. Like how can people do their jobs? Like I have to then keep spares, even more spares around to kind of cover for this. And I'm having to transfer data back and forth, and I mean, it can be very, very frustrating. But on the flip side, like I really love these products. Like I love my MacBook Pro. Like I love my iPhone 10. Like I love these products. So I feel like I've like spent the last 45 minutes like kind of complaining, but I guess I complain because I care, and I love these products, and I love what they do, and I love the way I use them and the way I interact with them, and I absolutely do love them. So and I have to like temper the fact that like we've really, yes, our technology probably in some ways has never been buggier, but we've also never asked it to do so much. I mean, I have a little voice assistant that I can call out to like turn on my lights. I mean, like that's like Jetson style stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think, like you're saying, we expect more of our technology because it has improved so much in the last 10, 15 years. But at the same time, like because we expect so much of it, we're seeing more issues, and I think this is true for Apple, but also for I feel like all types of technology. Where like YouTube was down for a couple hours yesterday for just like it was just completely not up at all.
Well, yeah, I mean it's like it's like wow, YouTube's down for 2 hours. That really sucks. And it's like, oh wait, I'm sorry, but assuming you don't pay, like the free video service that you use is down for like 2 hours out of the year. It's like, oh, that's actually not. It's pretty okay. I mean, I remember when YouTube launched, and that was like the thing had just launched. I remember when Google bought it, and they like the bandwidth bills they were having to pay to host all these videos was like insane. And so yeah, like I mean, things have never been in some ways worse in terms of like I would say like overall just technology quality. And it's like Android, that's everything. Like there's no technology that's even remotely perfect. But like, gosh, it is like what a time to be alive. I mean, like I can just like I can hit a button in my car and it like triggers my voice assistant on my iPhone, and I can just like yell out songs and it plays them. Like really, like if you'd have told like 20-year-old me that would exist 13 years later, I would have said you're lying. I mean, that's really next level amazing stuff if you step back and look at it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's an interesting like juxtaposition. If you're just like a normal person who isn't in the weeds on this stuff, technology is pretty incredible. But if you're having to manage it, or if you're following it really closely, there's just a lot of issues that are coming up with Apple and with other companies. And I don't know. It's just interesting to see how will that change over the next 10 years. Are we still going to be talking about software quality issues, or are they going to be like, are we going to be past that? And I don't know.
Well, that's why I'm really a big fan of like everybody slowing down in terms of like, I don't need, like, honestly, like if WWDC came around and they said, hey, launching this fall is iOS 11.5, I'm fine with that. Like I don't need, I need like, I would be fine with taking like a year and just like rooting out bugs amongst all parts of the platform, because I think that is more valuable to more regular people than something new. Like, so that's my hope. Like I need less new features and I want more quality. So I'm fine with like having a year when it is like way slower on new things.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, like I am a product manager managing software, and a lot of that, like how do you, it's a difficult question, because people are requesting new features constantly, and the new features get, press, or they get the bigger, especially for Apple, they sell new devices. Like Animoji, whether or not people use it that often, sold a lot of iPhones. And so the people there are having to balance between like how much are they putting in fixing bugs and defects and old issues or underlying structural problems, and how much are they investing in new things that are going to make them huge amounts of money. And it seems like in recent years that balance hasn't been quite right, and that more needed to be put in the software bug fixes side of things, and I guess based on the rumors that we've heard, they are tilting it back that direction for the next release. At least that's what the rumor mills say. That's at least the way that I look at it as someone who does work on software.
Yeah. I mean, it's a puzzle that there's really no perfect blueprint for.
Yeah. So I always end the episode with the same question. It's pretty broad, but it's interesting because no matter who, depending on the type of guest that I have, there's just wildly different answers. And that question is, what is one thing that you find unusual in tech right now?
The fact that 100 million people are paying for music monthly, I find like mind blowing in a good way. So like I was in high school when like Napster came out, and gosh, we had it on our computers at school. I don't know how we were allowed to do that. I mean, I'm sure they didn't know, but that was all. I mean, this was like, back in 2001, and I mean, we just like bootlegging music like it was going out of style, and then you move on to like Kazaa and those other like like garbage software, and I mean, just like the music industry seemed like, oh gosh, it's like never going to recover. And then like iTunes came out and it like offered like a legal way to pay for high quality downloads, and like that was a great first step. But then you still have people that, well, I know people still bootleg today, but like you can just pay like $10 a month and have access to like all the music on the planet. Relatively speaking, I know it's not 100%, but like it's a lot of music. And the fact that 100 million people are actually paying for music, and I'm just like adding, and that's where I'm rounding that, and I think it's actually more than that, because I think Spotify had like 70 worldwide in January, and Apple's like well over 30, and that was like a few months ago, and that doesn't count like Pandora and Tidal and other people. So again, like 100 million people are paying for music, are paying for music on a monthly basis. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that like these services like Apple Music and Spotify exist, and they get like the new music that comes out. Like I think these products would be very attractive to people if they like only had like stuff that came out, like maybe it was like things were gated off there for a year or something. I don't know, but like an album comes out tomorrow, and I can just like listen to it for free, or not for free, but like I don't have to pay any extra. And so I find it like just surprising that is a thing. Like in some ways it would expect it to be more like movies, where things like randomly will show up like 2 years later on Netflix or on Hulu, where there is no like Spotify for movies and TV shows. Like there is no like pay $10 a month or $20 a month and have access to everything, every movie ever made. And I wish that existed. Like I think that would be great if you could just pay, hey, $20 a month, any movie that comes out, you can just like watch it. And So yeah, but like it's like so that's the thing. So it just blows my mind. Like I remember going to Best Buy and paying $19 for a CD that had 2 good songs on it, and like now it's like that album came out, I'll just add it to my library. No longer is it like the call to action is not buy now, it's pre-save it on Spotify. Like that's the call to action. So it's like it's a weird time to be in the music industry if you're an artist and if you're a music fan. Like I would say it's never been a better time to be a music fan in reality.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really interesting, and it seems like it was It doesn't seem like it was the brightest move to get this whole setup by the music, like the rights holders. But I also think they were kind of in a sinking ship, and that's why we have this setup. Is their piracy was such a big deal for them, and probably a bigger deal than it was for the movies and TV because of cable and people going to movie theaters and all that stuff. And so they just kind of like reached out for help to music streaming, and I don't know how that's good for them, but it's great for me.
Yeah, and I would like argue, I know like artists probably don't make as much money from streaming as they do like paid downloads, and so like I personally, if it's like one of my top 3 bands, I will still buy those on iTunes and then just like add them to my Apple Music library through iCloud. But I've also probably never spent more money on like the music industry as I have in like say the past 3 years since I've had Apple Music. I guess Apple Music's been around almost 3 years. Like I've gone to more concerts, bought more band T-shirts, more band merchandise than I ever have in my life. So yes,
right.
like
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so like I'm the Apple Music is like the thing that gets me interested in the bands, and like I will then seek out like I've had bands like sell. Good example is Switchfoot. I love Switchfoot. Like I've seen them in concert way too many times. But like this summer they recorded all of their summer shows. Concerts, and they released them all on the internet for like $10 a show. They said, hey, our favorite one was Boston. So like I gave Switchfoot $10 to have that Boston show and added it to my iCloud music library. And that's not probably something, had I not had Apple Music, I probably wouldn't be as big a Switchfoot fan as I am, and I probably wouldn't have given them that $10. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is really interesting because it's like the whole music market has been flipped on its head twice now in our lifetimes, and it's good for end users, and I think it's good for some artists. It definitely changes the game. Like you're right, if somebody is your top like artist that you really love, and they can get enough people who do that, then they're going to be able to make a good living. But if you're that like 20th artist for all of your fans, and they all listen to your music, but they're not really going to like pay to go visit to go to a show, then it's going to be rough.
Yeah, I would add too. The cool thing is there's not business problems for bands becoming popular now. So like before, like this current era of you can just have direct access to your fans, like you would just if you couldn't get a record deal, like you were sunk, like you weren't making it on your own.
Right.
And like now, there's no technological reason, like if like say I don't want to go with a major record label, like you can go like direct to fan technology. There's the technology's there to do that. You can have a Patreon thing, like you can do all kinds of other things to like have fans support you. And those tools just like literally weren't available 20 years ago. Not saying like that's the easiest. That's not obviously not an easy thing, but like the technology is there to bypass the labels if you wanted to. I mean, like like Taylor Swift, for example, like if she just said, hey, I'm not like going to the label anymore. You can buy it on all my albums on TaylorSwift.com. She's still making like millions.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, where can people find you on the internet, Bradley?
Yeah, so I'm active on Twitter at Bradley Chambers, BradleyChambers. I blog at chambersdaily.com. I do not blog daily, so the URL is a lie. And then I have a weekly column on 9 to 5 Mac called making the grade, and then I write at various points during every week at thesweetsetup.com and toolsandtoys.net.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes for sure. And you guys can follow Unco at _UncoFM on Twitter, and you can find me on Twitter at TimothyBuckSF, and my writing over at timothybuck.me. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Bradley.
Thanks for having me. Everybody have a great week.